There are moments that redefine your life. For me, it was at a lavish Christmas party, standing in a borrowed suit, listening to my billionaire son lie to 100 people about a monthly $10. 000 allowance he supposedly gave me. In that instant, I wasn't his father. I was a prop, and I decided then and there that this performance was about to have a very, very different final act. This is the story of how I took back my dignity. If you believe that respect is more valuable than money, make sure you're subscribed. The December air in Dallas has a particular kind of bite. It's not the deep, honest cold of the north that feels clean and sharp. It's a thin, damp chill that worms its way through the seams of your jacket, settles into your bones, and stays there as a dull ache. It was that kind of chill that greeted me as I turned the key in the ignition of my 2098 Ford. The engine gave a low, protesting groan, a metal-on-metal scream that was painfully familiar, before catching with a violent shudder that shook the entire frame. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, watching it plume in the frigid air of the car's interior. The heater had given up the ghost 2 winters ago, and fixing it was a luxury I couldn't afford. Back in my apartment, the pre-dawn silence was thick, broken only by the low, tired hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. I'd finished my breakfast, a bowl of the cheapest store-brand cornflakes that tasted more like cardboard than corn, and washed it down with instant coffee that was more bitter than it was hot. For a long moment, I just sat at my small Formica table, staring at the faint, map-like water stain on the ceiling. It was a permanent brown cloud in my small, beige world. To a testament to a leaky roof the landlord kept promising to fix. My whole life felt like that stain, a slow, spreading decay that you eventually just learn to live with. Tonight was my son Michael's annual Christmas party, an event that, for me, had become less a celebration and more an annual performance of a role I no longer understood. Hanging on the back of my bedroom door was the suit. It wasn't mine. It belonged to my neighbor, Bill, who'd passed away from a heart attack last spring. His widow, a kind, stoic woman named Martha, had insisted I take it a few weeks ago. He would have wanted you to have it, Levi, she'd said, her eyes misty as she ran her hand over the fabric. Bill always said you were a good man. He'd hate for it to just hang in a closet. The wool was a little scratchy, the shoulders a bit too wide, and it smelled faintly of mothballs and a life that wasn't mine. But it was clean, dark, and better than anything I owned. As I put it on, my reflection in the dusty mirror seemed like a stranger, an old man playing the part of someone with somewhere important to be. My eyes drifted to a small, faded photograph on my nightstand. It was Michael, age 10, grinning with a missing front tooth and holding up a fishing trophy nearly as big as he was. I remember the day that picture was taken. I just finished a 72-hour stretch at the tire factory, covering shifts to save up enough money for that top-of-the-line fishing rod he wanted more than anything. My back had ached for a week, but seeing the look on his face when he reeled in that prize-winning bass, that had made it all worth it. I'd spent a lifetime working jobs that broke my body to build his dreams. For you, Michael, I thought, my fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar knot of the tie. It was all for you. The drive over was a slow crawl through a world I didn't belong to. My rattling Ford, with its one dim headlight and a persistent squeal from the fan belt, was a rusted relic navigating a silent, flowing river of brand-new Teslas, Mercedes, and BMWs. Michael's neighborhood wasn't just a place to live. It was a fortress of success. Each house was an architectural marvel of glass and stone. set back on acres of manicured lawns that looked like green velvet. Even in the dead of winter, I found a spot to park 3 blocks away, under the long, skeletal shadow of an oak tree, and walked the rest of the way. It was a small, foolish act of pride, but I couldn't bear the thought of the valet parking my rust bucket next to a $250,000 sports car. The moment the grand, heavy oak door opened, the warmth and noise washed over me like a physical wave, a blast of heated air, live jazz music drifting from hidden speakers, and the dizzying scent of pine needles, roasting food, and a dozen different expensive perfumes. The sheer light of it all was blinding after the darkness outside. Valets in crisp black uniforms hurried past me. Guests adorned in jewels and tailored suits laughed in effortless musical peals. I felt utterly and completely invisible. A ghost from another life who'd wandered into the wrong haunting ground. Levi. So glad you could make it. My daughter-in-law, Sophia, materialized before me. She was beautiful in that sharp, angular way that fashion magazines praise. Wearing a silk dress, the color of blood that probably cost more than my car. Her smile was a perfect, practiced curve that did not, for a single second, reach her cold, assessing eyes. Her gaze flicked down to my borrowed suit, then back up to my face. I saw a flicker of something pity, or maybe just pure, unadulterated contempt in her expression before it was expertly wiped away. Try not to get lost in the crowd. She gave my arm a light, brittle pat that felt more like a dismissal than a welcome. Then she turned away, to her entire posture shifting as she greeted a wealthy-looking couple behind me, her voice instantly transforming into a warm, effusive melody. I found a corner near a towering Christmas tree, which was decorated with so many glass ornaments, it looked like it was dripping with diamonds. I tried to blend into the opulent wallpaper, nursing a glass of water and watching the parade of power and influence. Sometime later, the music softened. A gentle tapping sound, a silver spoon against a crystal flute, drew everyone's attention. Michael stood near the grand, marble fireplace, looking every bit the billionaire titan of industry he was. He was handsome, charming, a man at the absolute peak of his power. He held his glass high. "If I could have your attention for just a moment," he began, his voice smooth and commanding, effortlessly filling the cavernous room. The lively chatter died instantly. This time of year is about gratitude for our successes, our friendships, and, most importantly, for family. He paused, a master of timing. His eyes scanned the crowd of adoring faces until they landed on me, pinned in my corner. He smiled. That broad, practiced, $1 million smile that I'd seen on the cover of Forbes. "I especially want to toast to my father, Levi," he announced, his voice booming with a false prevedent. Theatrical sincerity that made my stomach clench. A man who taught me the value of hard work. And I'm so proud, so incredibly proud, to be in a position where I can finally give back to him, to support him with $10,000 every single month, to make sure his golden years are truly golden. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A lie so enormous, it seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. Then, the applause started. It wasn't just a polite clapping, it was a roaring ovation. People were turning to me, their faces glowing with admiration for him. They were smiling at me, nodding in approval. Someone's phone camera flashed, A bright, blinding pop of light that seared an afterimage onto my retinas. And I just stood there, frozen. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. Affrontique. Trapped bird, trying to beat its way out. The blood drained from my face, and the room began to swim. The jazz music sounded warped and distant. $10,000. I could hear the constant, nagging squeal of my Ford's fan belt in my ears. I could see the bare shelves in my pantry. The can of tomato soup that was going to be my dinner tomorrow. Through the sea of smiling, clapping strangers, I saw Sophia. She wasn't clapping. She was just watching me. A small, knowing, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. It was a look of absolute ownership. She knew I was powerless, that I wouldn't dare shatter their perfect illusion. In that moment, I wasn't a father. I was a prop. I needed air. Now, pushing my way through clusters of guests who were now looking at me with a new, pitying respect, I fumbled with the cold, brass handle to a glass door and stumbled out onto a stone balcony. The cold air hit my hot face like a slap, sharp and real, and I gasped it in. My hands were trembling so badly I had to grip the freezing stone railing to steady myself. Leaning over, I pulled out my phone. The screen painfully bright in the darkness. There it was. An email from the power company. A friendly reminder. They called it my bill for $87. $50 was past due. If I didn't pay in 2 days, the power would be shut off. The contrast, the sheer, brutal, soul-crushing absurdity of it all, made a sound escape my lips, something between a sob and a laugh. You look pale. Levi, are you feeling all right? Sophia had followed me out. She slid the glass door shut behind her, muffling the party noise and encasing us in a bubble of cold silence. Her voice was laced with that same syrupy blues. Fake concern. I'm fine, I said, my own voice sounding hollow and distant. You know, at your age, you have to be careful with all this excitement, she said, taking a step closer. The diamonds on her ears glittered in the dim light. Stress isn't good for the heart. I finally turned to face her. The anger, a hot coal in my gut. He lied. Sophia. The words were quiet, but they felt heavy as lead. The money. You know I've never seen a dime of it. Her smile didn't falter, but it tightened, becoming something brittle and sharp. Oh, Levi, your memory, you know how it can be sometimes. You get confused. Michael set up very complex accounts for you. Investments, trusts. It's all very sophisticated. Things you don't need to worry your little head about. She patted my arm again. That same condescending, proprietary gesture. Honestly, it's all taken care of. You should just relax and be grateful. It wasn't a reassurance. It was a threat. Wrapped in silk. She was telling me to be quiet. She was telling me they had their story, and they would stick to it. I was just a confused, forgetful old man. Who would ever believe me over the generous Billionaire son? The drive home was a blur. The dazzling lights of the city's mansions faded in my rearview mirror, replaced by the dim, lonely, flickering streetlights of my own neighborhood. I didn't turn on the lights when I got inside my apartment. I just collapsed into my worn-out armchair in the dark, the scratchy wool of the suit still clinging to me like a shroud. The deep, damp cold of the room seeped back into my bones. I sat there for hours, replaying the scene over and over. Michael's booming voice, the thunder of applause, Sophia's victorious smirk, Her words on the balcony. Investments. Trusts. Things you don't need to worry about. She wasn't just covering for a lie. She was confirming a process. It clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. The money was real. The $10,000 was being moved every month. My name was being used. It was a tax write-off, a financial strategy, and a public relations stunt all rolled into one. And if that money wasn't going into my bank account, then there was only one question left to answer. Where exactly was it going? This wasn't just a story to make my son look good. This was a calculated, long-term scheme. It was fraud. And for the first time all night, the crushing shame that had been choking me began to burn, slowly turning into something else. Something cold and hard and perfectly clear. Sleep didn't come that night. It couldn't. How could you sleep when the very foundation of your life had cracked open, revealing a rot you never knew existed? I didn't bother changing out of the borrowed suit. I just sat there in the chilled darkness of my armchair, the hours ticking by on the small kitchen clock. Each tick was a hammer blow, pounding the truth deeper into my mind. Memories, once warm and comforting, now played back with a sinister new light. I remembered calling Michael 3 years ago, my voice thick with shame, to ask for a small loan. The transmission on the Ford had gone out, and the repair cost was more than I had in the world. "Oh, Dad, I wish I could," he'd said, his voice oozing with synthetic regret. "But all my capital is tied up in long-term investments right now. The market is volatile. You understand." I had understood. I'd felt guilty for asking. Now, I saw it for the lie it was. He hadn't been protecting his investments. He'd been protecting the fiction of my poverty. A fiction he apparently found very useful. I remembered Sophia, a few months back, casually mentioning how they'd written off a huge donation to an art museum for tax purposes. "It's amazing what you can do when you have the right accountants," she'd chirped. The words echoed in the silent room. Accountants, investments, trusts. It was a language I didn't speak, a world I didn't inhabit. But they had dragged my name into it, twisting my life into a tool for their own enrichment. The hot flash of shame from the party had cooled, solidifying into something else entirely. It was a cold, hard resolve that settled deep in my gut. They thought I was a prop. It was time to show them what a prop could do. The next morning, as the first weak, gray light of dawn filtered through my blinds, a plan began to form. It was a desperate, risky idea, born from the knowledge that I had nothing to lose. They saw me as a frail, lonely old man. Fine. I would be a frail, lonely old man. I picked up my phone, my fingers surprisingly steady, and dialed Michael's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy. "Dad, it's 6 in the morning. Is everything okay?" I pitched my voice to sound weary, a little confused. "Michael, I'm sorry to call so early. I just had a rough night. After the party, I feel like I might have been a little rude to Sophia. I was just feeling a bit overwhelmed." There was a pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "It's okay. Dad, we understand. It was a lot for you." "I know," I said, letting my voice tremble just a bit. I'd like to come over today. Maybe drop off a little card for her to apologize. I won't stay long. I just want to make things right." I knew from years of habit that Michael and Sophia had a standing brunch meeting with their financial team every Tuesday morning from 10 until noon. He sighed, a sound of patronizing patience. "Sure, Dad, that's really thoughtful. We'll be out for a couple of hours this morning, but I'll tell the housekeeper to let you in. You can leave it on the kitchen counter." "Thank you, son," I said, and hung up before he could hear the ice in my voice. The drive over felt different this time. I wasn't filled with dread, but with a humming, nervous energy. I pulled up to the massive iron gates, and just as Michael had promised, they swung open smoothly. I parked the Ford right in the circular driveway. A deliberate act of defiance. The housekeeper, a quiet woman who always looked scared, let me in and then discreetly vanished into the laundry room. The house was oppressively silent. It felt less like a home and more like a museum. Every surface polished to a sterile gleam. The air was still and temperature controlled. My worn-out shoes felt sacrilegious on the gleaming marble floors. My heart was pounding. A steady, heavy drum against my ribs. I walked past the living room, past the dining room with its table that could seat 20, and straight towards the back of the house, to Michael's office. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside, closing it gently behind me. The room was a shrine to my son's success. Walls lined with mahogany bookshelves. A massive desk that looked like it was carved from a single tree, and framed photos of him with governors, celebrities, and business tycoons. It smelled of leather and money. My eyes scanned the desk. It was immaculately tidy. Piles of neat paperwork. A gleaming laptop. A cellophane seat. My breath caught in my throat. There it was, sitting in a small, leather-bound tray, a business checkbook for one of his corporate accounts. My hands shook as I picked it up. I flipped through the carbon copies of recently written checks, utility payments, vendor invoices, payroll. And then I saw it. A check from 2 weeks prior, and another from the month before that, and another, all in the same precise amount, $10. Ling. My eyes darted to the pay, to the order of line. The name written in Michael's sharp, confident script was not Levi. It was S. Torres. S. Torres. For a moment, my mind went blank, and then it hit me with the force of a physical blow. Sophia's maiden name? Before she was a wealthy Dallas socialite, she was Sophia Torres. They weren't just lying. They were actively funneling the money, under the guise of supporting me, directly into an account Sophia controlled under her old name. I felt a wave of nausea. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling with the camera icon. With shaking hands, I took several clear, sharp photos of the check copies, making sure the date, the amount, and the name were all perfectly legible. Emboldened, my fear momentarily replaced by a surge of adrenaline, I glanced back at the desk. There was a thin manila folder labeled simply Household, a calculated risk. I opened it. Inside were not receipts for groceries, but printed emails between Michael and a man from a high-priced accounting firm. I scanned the pages, my blood running cold. Phrases jumped out at me. Regarding the monthly family support allocation, fully deductible as a business expense under the current framework. Optimizing your personal and corporate tax burden for the fourth quarter. It was all there. A deliberate, professionally advised scheme to commit tax fraud, using me as the unknowing ghost, at the center of it all. I photographed every single page until my phone's memory was nearly full. Then I placed the folder back exactly as I'd found it, closed the checkbook, and slipped out of the office, my heart feeling like it was going to explode. I didn't even stop in the kitchen. I walked straight out the front door, got in my car, and drove away, not looking back. I pulled over a few blocks down the road, my body trembling with the aftershock of what I'd just done. I needed more. I needed his own voice. I opened the simple voice recorder app on my phone, hit the red button, and dialed his number. "Hey, Dad. Everything. Okay. Did you drop off the card?" he answered, his voice sounding relaxed. "Post-brunch." "I did," I said, keeping my voice level. "Michael, I was just thinking about what you said at the party, about those accounts you set up for me, the trusts and things." I heard him sigh, the sound crackling over the phone. "Dad, we talked about this. It's all handled. You don't need to worry about it." "I know, son. I know. But my bank account is, well, it's pretty much empty. I was just wondering if I could get the name of the bank where the trust is, just for my own records." His tone shifted. The manufactured patience was gone, replaced by a sharp edge of irritation. "It doesn't work like that. It's complicated. It's not a checking account you can just pull money from. It's an investment strategy." "I see," I said softly. "It's just, I really could have used some of that money when the transmission went out." There was a long, cold silence on the other end. "Dad, seriously," he finally said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I think you should see a doctor. Your memory isn't what it used to be. You're getting things confused. You're starting to sound paranoid." "I'm not paranoid, Michael," I said. "We'll talk about this later." He snapped, his voice cold and final. "I have a meeting. Just don't worry about it." He hung up. I stopped the recording. I had it. His lies, his dismissal, his attack on my sanity. It was all there. Later that afternoon, I sat in a booth at a cheap diner that smelled of stale coffee and fried onions. Across from me was David, a man I'd known for 30 years. We'd worked together at the plant before he went to night school and became a lawyer. He wasn't a fancy corporate attorney. He handled wills, divorces, and DUIs for working people. I told him everything. From the party to the checkbook to the recorded phone call. I watched his face shift from friendly concern to confusion to shocked disbelief, and finally to a quiet, simmering rage on my behalf. When I finished, I pushed my phone across the table and showed him the photos. He stared at the name S. Torres for a long, silent minute. He finally looked up, his eyes hard. "Levi," he said, his voice low and serious. "This is bad. This isn't just a family squabble or a lie to impress some friends. They're not just being jerks." He leaned forward. "This is a multi-year, documented conspiracy to commit tax fraud and wire fraud, and using you, an elderly parent, as the vehicle for it. That's elder financial abuse. What they're doing isn't just immoral. It's a felony. Several felonies. Actually." The word felony landed on the table between us with a thud. It made it real. It gave a name to the monster that had been hiding in plain sight. David shook his head. "This is way above my pay grade. My friend, you need a shark. Someone who eats people like your son for breakfast? He pulled a pen from his pocket and scribbled a name and number on a napkin. Her name is Patricia Collins. She specializes in financial crimes and elder abuse cases. She's tough as nails. But she's the best there is. The next day, I found myself in a downtown high-rise, sitting in a leather chair that was far more comfortable than my suit. The law office was the opposite of Michael's world, not opulent, but radiating a quiet, lethal competence. Patricia Collins was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through you. She didn't offer fake sympathy. She just listened. Her expression unreadable. As I laid out the whole sordid story, presenting my evidence, the photos, the recording, my own detailed notes like a confession. When I was done, she sat back in her chair, stapling her fingers. She looked at the photos of the checks, then at the transcript of the call I'd typed up, then finally, at me. The silence stretched on, and my hope began to dwindle. Maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe they were too powerful. Then, a slow, thin smile spread across her face. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just caught the scent of its prey. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice clear and cold as ice. "Their arrogance will be their downfall." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. And for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of real power. "Let's get to work." The phrase, "let's get to work," hung in the air of Patricia Collins's office. Not as a cheer, but as a kiat, definitive statement of fact. It was the sound of a heavy machine being switched on. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't just a victim reacting to the whims of my son and his wife. I was part of a plan. A cog in a machine designed for one purpose: to find the truth. "Their primary defense will be your competency," Patricia said, her voice cutting through my thoughts. She leaned forward, her hands flat on the polished surface of her desk. "Michael has already laid the groundwork for that with his 'you should see a doctor' narrative. They will paint you as a confused, bitter old man, too resentful of his son's success. They will claim this is all a misunderstanding, a fabrication born of a failing mind." I felt a familiar flash of heat in my chest, the anger that had become my constant companion. "But the evidence—" "The evidence is excellent," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "But evidence can be spun. Our job is to make it unspinnable. And we do that by letting their arrogance lead them into a trap. We won't start with a cannonball. We'll start with a polite knock on the door." She explained the strategy. It wasn't about immediate confrontation. It was about creating a record. The first step would be a formal but gently worded letter from her office. A demand letter, she called it. Though its tone would be anything but demanding, it would express concern over potential accounting discrepancies regarding funds allocated for my support and would cordially invite them to a meeting to clarify the matter amicably. "They will laugh at it," Patricia predicted, her eyes glinting. "They will see it as a sign of weakness. They'll think you hired some small-time lawyer who is in over his head. They will feel superior. And that is exactly what we want." 2 days later, the letter was sent via certified mail. I spent that evening imagining the moment it arrived at their pristine, multi-million-dollar fortress. I could picture it perfectly. Michael, home from a day of conquering the financial world, would see the letterhead from a law firm he'd never heard of. He'd open it, scan the polite, legalistic prose, and a slow, contemptuous smile would spread across his face. I could almost hear the conversation. He'd toss it onto the marble kitchen island. "You're not going to believe this. He'd say to Sophia. She'd pick it up, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the paper. Her eyes would narrow. Not in fear, but in annoyance. The old man is actually doing it, she'd say, her voice a mixture of disbelief and amusement. He found some bottom-feeder lawyer to write a scary letter. Does he really think this will work? He's confused. Honey, Michael would reply, pouring himself a glass of ridiculously expensive scotch. He doesn't know what he's doing. We'll have Mark, their high-powered, corporate bulldog of a lawyer, shut this down with a single phone call. It's pathetic. Really. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. The silence from their end was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped into my throat. Every official-looking envelope in my mailbox made my hands tremble. I found myself pacing the small confines of my apartment, tracing the same worn path in the carpet. I was a soldier in a trench, waiting for a battle that refused to begin. The confidence I'd felt in Patricia's office began to fray at the edges, replaced by the familiar gnawing of doubt. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a foolish old man picking a fight I couldn't possibly win. A week after the letter was sent, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Patricia. Nothing, I said, the word coming out flatter than I intended. We've heard nothing. Good, she replied, her voice perfectly calm. That's their arrogance talking. They've decided to ignore us. They believe if they treat us like we don't exist, we'll simply go away. They've just made their first official mistake. They have failed to respond to a formal legal inquiry. Now, we escalate. The next day, the cannonball was fired. Patricia filed the official petition with the Dallas County Court. It was no longer a polite request. It was a lawsuit. With it came the subpoenas. The word itself sounded powerful, like a spell being cast. One went to Michael's bank, demanding all records for the corporate account the checks were drawn from. Another went to his high-priced accounting firm, demanding all communications and documents related to the family support allocation. And then, Patricia added a masterstroke I never would have considered. A third subpoena was sent to the board of the prestigious Dallas Children's Charity. The one Sophia chaired with such public fanfare. It didn't demand financial records. It simply requested all minutes from board meetings where Sophia had discussed her family's philanthropic efforts and personal contributions, a category under which supporting her elderly father-in-law would certainly fall. It was a direct, surgical strike on her most prized possession, her social standing. The first crack in their fortress appeared less than 48 hours later. It came in the form of a phone call to me. I was just finishing my meager lunch when my phone rang, displaying Michael's name. I took a deep breath, just as Patricia had instructed, and answered. The voice on the other end was not the calm, condescending son I knew. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 30 years. Since he was a teenager who had just crashed his first car. It was tight, high-pitched, and laced with pure, unadulterated panic. What did you do? He hissed. There was no greeting. What the hell did you do? My accountant just called me. He's been subpoenaed. He's asking me questions I can't answer. He's talking about a formal audit. I stayed silent, letting him talk. And Sophia's charity. Are you insane? You're trying to ruin us after everything I've done for you. This is how you repay me. By trying to destroy our lives over some fantasy in your head. The gaslighting was still there, but it was frantic now. Desperate. The condescension had been replaced by a raw, ugly threat. You have no idea what you're doing. Old man, you are playing with fire. You can't even comprehend. You will stop this. You will call off your dog. Right now. My hand was gripping the phone so tightly, my knuckles were white. My heart was a jackhammer. But Patricia's voice was in my ear, calm and steady from our practice session. I took a breath. Michael, I said, my own voice surprisingly level. Please direct all future communications to my lawyer. And I hung up. I stood there for a long moment, the silence of my apartment rushing back in. I imagined the scene on the other end. Michael, staring at his phone in disbelief. His face a mask of fury. I could picture him turning to Sophia, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around him. The blame would start, "This is your fault, that Torres's account was your idea," he'd scream. And she would fire back, her voice like shards of glass. "My idea. You were the one bragging about it at Christmas. You were the one who got sloppy." The first cracks were showing, and I had put them there. A week later, Patricia called. "The walls are coming down," she said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. The bank records came in. It's all here. Levi. Every single check. Cashed and deposited into a savings account at a different bank. An account opened by Sophia Torres 5 years ago. 2 weeks after they hired the new accountants, and the statements from that account. Oh, they tell a story. She proceeded to read a partial list of the debits: a 5-figure shopping spree at Neiman Marcus, a down payment on a new Maserati for Sophia's birthday, a wire transfer to a jeweler in New York, a weekend at a ski resort in Aspen. Every word was another nail in their coffin, another testament to the depth of their betrayal. They weren't just hiding money, they were spending it, laughing at me with every swipe of their credit card. The consequences began to ripple outwards. David called me one evening. "Turn on the financial news," he said. I found the channel. A bland-looking analyst was talking about Michael's company. A slight but unexpected dip in stock value today. The analyst droned. Amid unconfirmed rumors of a significant internal legal dispute involving the CEO's family, the company has refused to comment. It was a small thing, a tiny tremor, but it was a sign. The world they had built on a foundation of lies was beginning to shake. The next move came from them. It was a call to Patricia from their lawyer. Mark. It was an offer, a generous one, a 6-figure sum, to be paid immediately. In return, I would sign a non-disclosure agreement and the lawsuit would be dropped, sealed, and buried forever. Patricia called me to present the offer. "It's hush money, Levi," she said, her voice neutral. "It's more money than you've seen in your life. It would solve all your problems. No one would blame you for taking it. The decision is yours." I looked around my tiny, crumbling apartment. I thought about the overdue power bill, the failing transmission, the taste of canned soup. That money could change everything. I could buy a small house, a new truck. I could live without the constant, grinding worry that had been my shadow for decades. But then I thought of Michael's voice on the phone, calling me paranoid. I thought of Sophia's smirk at the party. I thought of them skiing in Aspen with money stolen in my name. "No," I said, my voice clear and firm. "Tell them no." There was a pause on the other end, and then I heard Patricia let out a small breath. "Good," she said. "I was hoping you'd say that." She called their lawyer back. Her report of the conversation was brief. "I told him my client isn't interested in hush money," she said. "He's interested in the truth." The final move of the chapter came a week later. It was the nuclear option. Patricia filed a motion to compel a formal deposition. Michael and Sophia would be forced, under oath and penalty of perjury, to answer her questions. She deliberately scheduled it for the day of his company's quarterly board meeting, a day she knew he would be surrounded by the very people he sought to impress. The notice wasn't sent by mail. It was delivered by a professional process server. I wasn't there. But Patricia's investigator was watching from a distance, and he described the scene to her in vivid detail. Michael was standing at the head of a long, polished table in a glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor, presenting a slideshow to a dozen stern-faced board members. He was in his element, a king in his court. At that moment, a man in a simple courier's uniform entered the room and walked directly to the head of the table. He placed a single, crisp legal envelope in front of my son. Michael Callahan, the server asked, his voice calm and professional. "You've been served." The investigator said the silence in the room was absolute. The slideshow froze on a chart of upward trending profits. Every single pair of eyes in that room swiveled from the process server to the envelope, and then to Michael's face. And his face, the investigator reported, went from confident and commanding to confused, to utterly, devastatingly white with shock and public humiliation. His two worlds, the one he built and the one he tried to bury, had just collided. The day of the deposition dawned gray and cold. The Dallas sky, the color of slate. It felt fitting. I'd put on the borrowed suit one last time, not as a costume to blend in with the wealthy, but as armor. It felt different today. It felt like my own. Driving downtown, I didn't feel the familiar anxiety that usually twisted my stomach into knots. In its place was a strange, profound calm. The outcome was no longer in my hands. The machine that Patricia had set in motion was now simply moving towards its inevitable conclusion. The deposition took place in a conference room at a neutral law firm. It was a soulless, anonymous space, dominated by a long, polished mahogany table that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights from above like a dark, still lake. A court reporter sat at one end, her fingers poised over her stenotype machine. A silent observer ready to capture every word, every lie. I sat on one side of the table with Patricia. She was the picture of calm competence, her files arranged in neat, precise stacks in front of her. On the other side sat Michael, Sophia, and their lawyer, Mark. They looked like they hadn't slept. Michael's usual confident tan seemed pasty under the artificial light, and there was a tight, strained set to his jaw. Sophia was dressed in a severe, dark suit, her face a pale, perfect mask of composure that was betrayed by the slight, rhythmic tapping of her fingers on the table. They refused to look at me. They stared at a fixed point on the wall just over my head. As if I were a ghost, they had collectively decided to ignore. Patricia began, her voice even and disarmingly pleasant. "Good morning. For the record, could you each state your name and address?" They complied, their voices clipped and formal. "Thank you." Patricia continued, her eyes fixed on Michael. "Mr. Callahan, I'd like to take you back to the evening of the 20th of December of last year. You hosted a Christmas party at your home. Is that correct?" "Yes," Michael said, shifting in his chair. "And during that party, you made a toast, a speech of sorts, regarding your father, Levi Callahan, who is present today. Do you recall that speech?" Michael exchanged a quick, nervous glance with his lawyer, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. I do. I said I was proud of my father, and that I was happy to be in a position to support him. And how? Specifically, did you claim to be supporting him? Patricia asked. Her tone still light. Conversational. I said I provided him with a monthly stipend for his living expenses. And what was the amount of that stipend? Mr. Callahan, the amount you announced to your 100 guests. Michael's jaw tightened. $10,000. He said, the words sounding like they were being dragged out of him. $10,000 a month. Patricia repeated, letting the number hang in the silent room. A very generous sum. And you made this statement publicly. Is that correct? In front of your friends? Your business associates? Yes. Thank you. Mr. Callahan. Patricia paused. And in that moment, the entire atmosphere in the room shifted. The pleasantries were over. She picked up the first of her neat stacks of paper. I am now presenting what has been marked as Exhibit A. It is a certified copy of Mr. Levi Callahan's bank statements for the past 3 years. Could you please take a look at the summary page? It shows the total monthly deposits. Do you see any deposits in the amount of $10,000? Mark, their lawyer, leaned over to look. Michael didn't move. We have no comment on that document at this time. Mark said, his voice a flat monotone. I see. Patricia said. She then slid another document across the table. It was a large, glossy photograph of the check copy from Michael's office. The image was projected onto a large screen on the wall behind me. The name S. Torres was sharp and undeniable. Let's move on to Exhibit B. Mr. Callahan, can you identify this document? Michael stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. It appears to be a copy of a check. He mumbled. Indeed. A check from your corporate account. For $10,000. Can you please read the name of the payee? Written in the pay to the order of line. He was silent. Sophia had stopped tapping her fingers. She was perfectly still, like a porcelain doll. Mr. Callahan Patricia pressed. S. Torres. He finally whispered, the name barely audible. S. Torres. Patricia repeated, her voice like steel. And who is S. Torres? No comment. Mark interjected, his voice sharp. Allow me to rephrase. Patricia said, her eyes never leaving Michael. Mrs. Callahan, she said, turning her head slightly toward Sophia. Your maiden name was Torres. Was it not? Sophia flinched as if she'd been struck. No comment. For the next hour, it was an avalanche. Patricia presented exhibit after exhibit, each one another shovelful of dirt on their metaphorical grave. The screen on the wall became a slideshow of their deceit. Check after check made out to S. Torres. The bank statements from Sophia's secret account showing the deposits. The emails from the accountants discussing the family support allocation as a tax strategy. And then, the statements from Sophia's account detailing the withdrawals, the shopping sprees, the cars, the vacations. With each new piece of evidence, I could feel the pressure in the room building, the air growing thick and heavy with their lies. Michael seemed to shrink in his chair, the powerful CEO persona dissolving into a pale, sweating man, trapped in an expensive suit. Sophia's composure began to crack, her mask of indifference crumbling into a pinched, ugly expression of fear and rage. Their lawyer's no comment became a desperate, repetitive mantra, the only defense they had left. Finally, Patricia put down her last financial document. She looked at Michael, her expression softening into one of mock sympathy. "Mr. Callahan, this is all very confusing," she said. "On one hand, you claim to be giving your father $10,000 a month. On the other, the evidence seems to show that money was being diverted to your wife. It's no wonder your father was confused. In fact, you yourself suggested he was confused. Didn't you? You told him his memory was failing. You suggested he see a doctor. Is that your testimony today? That your father is mentally incompetent? That he is simply imagining all of this?" Michael was trapped. He looked at his lawyer, who gave him a slight shake of the head. He looked at Sophia, who was glaring at him with pure venom. He knew that to attack my sanity now, in the face of this mountain of evidence, would make him look like a monster. I was concerned for his well-being. He stammered. "Concerned. Patricia Echoed. I see." She reached for a small digital recorder on the table. "I am now presenting Exhibit G. It is an audio recording of a phone call between you and your father on the morning of the 22nd of December. She pressed play. My own voice filled the room first, calm and questioning, and then came Michael's. His voice, amplified in the dead silence of the conference room, was a weapon. It was dripping with condescension, sharp with irritation, cold with dismissal. "Dad, seriously," his recorded voice said, echoing off the polished walls. "I think you should see a doctor. Your memory isn't what it used to be. You're getting things confused. You're starting to sound paranoid." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the most profound silence I have ever heard. In that moment, everyone in the room, including his own lawyers, heard the truth. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated act of cruelty. It wasn't just about the money. It was about his willingness to destroy my mind, my credibility, my very identity, just to cover up his own greed. Mark, their lawyer, leaned over and whispered something urgently into Michael's ear. Michael just stared blankly at the table. Sophia finally broke. A single, choked sob escaped her lips. "I'd like to request a 5-minute recess," Mark said, his voice strained. Patricia nodded. "Take 10. They practically fled the room. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I could see them in the hallway. "Affrontique," whispered argument. Michael was gesturing wildly. Mark was trying to calm him down. Sophia was weeping, her hands covering her face. 10 minutes later, only Mark returned. He looked tired, defeated. He sat down and slid a piece of paper across the table to Patricia. It was a settlement offer. It wasn't just the 6-figure sum from before. It was a number with 7 figures. It included full restitution of every dollar they had diverted, plus dommage, plus all my legal fees. It also included a clause stipulating they would issue a formal, public apology for their financial mismanagement and would cooperate fully with an independent audit to be submitted to the IRS. It was a complete and total surrender. Patricia read it, then passed it to me. I looked at the number, but it didn't really register. It was the other words that mattered. Restitution, apology, audit. It was justice. I looked at Patricia and nodded. "Yes," I said. The war was over. I walked out of that high-rise building and into the bright afternoon sun. I had to squint. The world seemed sharper, the colors more vivid. I took a deep, clean breath. And for the first time in years, the familiar, heavy weight in my chest was gone. It felt like I had been carrying a 100-pound sack of rocks on my back for a decade and had just been allowed to set it down. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt light. A few months passed. The news of the settlement and the subsequent scandal was a brief, contained story in the business pages. Michael was forced to step down as CEO of his company. Sophia's name vanished from the society pages and the charity boards. Their carefully constructed world had imploded. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, ignominious hiss of a deflating balloon. I never heard from either of them again. With the settlement money, I didn't buy a mansion or a sports car. I bought a small, 2-bedroom house on a quiet street in a town an hour outside of Dallas. It had a big backyard with a tall oak tree. I sold the old Ford and bought a reliable, used pickup truck. And in the garage, I set up the woodworking shop I had dreamed of my entire life. The final scene of this story isn't me in a courtroom. It's me. In that garage. The air thick with the clean, honest smell of sawdust. The late afternoon sun streams through the window, illuminating the fine particles of wood dancing in the air. My hands, old and calloused, are steady as they guide a piece of cherry wood across the blade of a table saw. I'm not building anything for money or for show. I'm building a simple, sturdy bookshelf. I'm creating something real, something useful, something true. I am not a billionaire. I am not a prop. I am a man who works with his hands, in a home that is his own, at peace, and in the quiet hum of the saw and the feel of the smooth, sanded wood beneath my fingertips. I have found something far more valuable than any amount of money. I have found my dignity.